Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome here. This is your host, Muawiyah Taka, and we're going to continue our series, The Prophetic Chronicles, where we delve in and dive into the lives of the Prophets, alayhi salam, starting from our father, Adam, alayhi salam, all the way to the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So far, we've covered a great number of prophets and messengers. We've covered Adam, alayhi salam, and his son Sheeth and Idris. So those were, as you mentioned before, three who were with amongst their people before shirk, before idolatry came into the children of Adam. And then we had Nuh, who was the first one who was sent to his people in order to invite them back to al-Islam. And after Nuh, we had Hud and Salih and so on and so forth. And then we went to and discussed now Ibrahim alayhi salam. He was the first not the first, but he was one of the prophets who was sent to his people, and his father, unfortunately, was an idol worshipper. But Ibrahim was very unique in that he challenged his people using logic, using debates, and established the proof upon them practically with evidence so that they actually gave the answers that they needed. And we mentioned how he migrated from that place in what was known as Babil, which is in the south part of Iraq, and he migrated towards Palestine. And we covered the story of the event, what happened to him and his wife in Egypt. And from that moment, he was gifted, or his wife and him was gifted, Hajar and a great amount of wealth, whereby he migrated back to Palestine. And it was mentioned by the historians that Lut alayhi salam, because Lut was a relative of Ibrahim, he was given some of the wealth that he acquired in Egypt. Because Ibrahim, alhamdulillah, had quite a lot of wealth by that time. And obviously he shared some of that wealth with his either his nephew or his cousin, based on the difference in historical accounts. And by the way, it's important to understand here that when it comes to the story of the prophets, alayhim salam, as we discuss and explore their lives, there's many parts of their lives which we know 100% because it's mentioned in the Quran or the authentic Sunnah. That's facts. But there are sometimes details about their lives we weren't told by Allah or His Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. It wasn't something that was mentioned in either in the Quran or in the Sunnah. However, what we can do sometimes is refer to other historical sources, i.e. what is with the children of Israel. And this is very important to talk about and discuss about this very briefly, because in previous episodes we've spoken about many events. Some of those events have only been mentioned in the people of the book. So the question is, as a Muslim, how do we deal with this information? Do we accept what they say? Do we reject what they say? What do we do? So we have a hadith which gives us these guidelines, this guidance as to how we deal with information from the children of the book. And we have the hadith which says, حَدِّثُوا عَنْ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ وَلَا حَرَجٍ. You can narrate from the children of Israel and there's no harm. So what that means is, if we find them speak about the prophets of the past and there's nothing in there that contradicts the Quran, then we can accept it. If the Quran affirms it and agrees with it, obviously we accept it. But if it's something that doesn't contradict the Quran and doesn't contradict the Sunnah, it's neither here nor there, it's just some piece of information, then we can mention it as something that they say. That's why you might have heard me say in the past, qila, or it was said, or some say. So it's no harm in mentioning it. So for example, what type of stick or tree did the staff of Musa come from? These kind of details don't add much to the story in terms of adding extra beliefs or any rules, and not really take anything away from it. So it's just some extra detail. So we have some little extra details here and there. And from these little bits of extra details was the fact that Lut alayhi salam, Prophet Lut, was at the time living in Palestine when Ibrahim returned. And at some point in his life, Lut made a migration to another town, another place called Sodom. In English, we call it Sodom and Gomorrah. In Arabic, we call it Sodom. So it's just basically there was a place or a town or a city, depends on how you want to define it, where there was a nation of people who were there, and Prophet Lut went to them and was living amongst them. It's not entirely clear whether Lut alayhi salam was sent there as a messenger or he just traveled there because it was something to travel, maybe had a particular need to go there. Wallahu a'lam, who knows? But no doubt, when Lut went to his people, obviously he engaged with the people around him, like all the Anbiya engaged with people around him. Now, before we continue the story of Lut alayhi salam, we want to introduce the story of Lut with an event that occurred with Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Ibrahim alayhi salam, at this time, he was probably about 100 years old, and his wife was about 90 years old, so they were quite elderly. This means that the events of breaking the idols, the events of discussing with the stars and the issue of Imran, these things happened decades ago. Maybe even the event, or most likely the event that happened with the oppressive individual in Egypt was also decades ago. Now they're very old and matured. And two people came to Ibrahim, and as they came, as normally as any right person would do, would they honor their guest. So Ibrahim wanted to honor these people as guests, these maybe travelers coming by, want to honor them. So what he did was present to them ijl. So it's like a calf or a slaughtered animal, presented to them some food, and they refused to eat the food. فَأَوْجَسَ مِنْهُمْ خِيفَةً, and Ibrahim, was taken aback. Why did they refuse? And it was said by some of the scholars of tafsir that the reason why Ibrahim sensed from them or felt from them an element of fear was because it was customary that only a person who intends to harm you would refuse food. So this is obviously something customary to their time. Someone comes to your village, your home, you offer them food, it's customary to eat the food. And normally the only person who would refuse is someone who has ill will towards you. So because of that, these two individuals said, "La takhaf," don't have fear. And then they gave him glad tidings, or gave him and his wife glad tidings of a child. So it became clear now from this event that these weren't just any normal individuals, these were angels sent from Allah. And they passed by Ibrahim to inform Ibrahim of information, inform Ibrahim of a miracle, you could say. And I kind of mentioned this before in a previous episode. I mentioned how the miracles given to Ibrahim were interesting, to say the least, meaning that previous miracles, like for example of the camel coming from the mountain given to Prophet Salih, that was a sign for the people to listen. But the miracle given to Ibrahim, or the miracles we've seen so far given to Ibrahim, they were actually almost like a gift to Ibrahim, or almost like a blessing for him specifically. Being saved from the fire, showing the bird how the bird was brought together, or the four birds brought back together, back to life. And here's another miracle, which was they gave glad tidings that his wife Sarah, who is now 90 years old, not only was she unable to have children while she was young, she definitely is unable to have a child in her 90s, but yet she was still given glad tidings of having a child. And even Allah mentioned that she slapped her face in shock. And she said, how? A barren woman who is old? And the best way to understand her question is not that she doubted that Allah can do so, it was more like shock. Oh, as in, you're going to give me a child at this age? And the angel said, don't worry, if this is easy for Allah to give you, and it's something which is simple to happen. Much like how the angels asked Allah about the creation of Adam, she also asked about how she's been given a child. And that was not only the miracle of being given the child, they were also given bashara, they were also being given a message directly from the angels. I mean, that's amazing if you think about it. You're literally told, not only have you been given a blessing of a child from Allah, you were also told by an angel. So that's amazing. But anyway, they were passing by, they wanted to tell Ibrahim of this amazing event, and then after that, they said, we're now going to a nation who are sinful individuals, to go and destroy them, except for those who listen and obey. And what they were talking about was going to Lut alayhi salam and the people there. And it's important to understand that sometimes people say Qawm Lut, or the people of Lut, which is interesting because they weren't Lut's people. Lut went there, but he was from the same place as Ibrahim in Iraq. So he wasn't from that area of Sodom, he was from Babel. So technically speaking, maybe you could say that it's not really correct to call them Qawm Lut because they weren't his people. But you could maybe you could say people of Sodom or people of Sodom, but that might be more accurate. But however way you want to address it, the fact is they were now on their way to deal with the people of Lut. But what was their crime? What did they do exactly wrong? Now there's a few things that the people of Lut did. It wasn't just shirk, it wasn't just idolatry like with previous generations or previous examples of people going astray. They also engaged in other forms of crimes. One of those crimes is that they were highway robbers, that they used to engage in robbery of people, like obviously in that time they never had, you could say, police like we have today. So if someone was traveling from this one town to another town, they might go out in the desert and find them and steal their wealth. They might even kill them because there's no one around to save them. So they used to engage in highway robbery. But also they used to engage in what we can now call sodomy, or basically having two men having intercourse with each other, or not even intercourse, having activities, sexual activities with each other. And thirdly, this is what something they used to do amongst themselves. And thirdly, another crime is that they used to force themselves on other men. So it was mentioned in some of the books of tafsir that in their majlis, what would happen is that as they're having a little majlis, a man would walk by and they'll flip a coin, or they'll draw straws or something. They would make a way to find who's going to be the one who had the opportunity to take that person and have their way with him, without their permission, obviously. So what they used to do was some heinous crimes, some absolutely despicable and disgusting activities. But again, what's important to understand is that it wasn't just the fact that they used to force themselves on other men, it's also the fact that they did it amongst themselves as well. So obviously Lut tried to encourage them to be righteous, encourage them to come back to Allah, to worship Allah, and obviously they didn't listen. But what was unique about the event of Lut is that when the angels came to Lut, obviously they came in the form of a man. They saw him or saw them, and they wanted to have their way with them as well. So we have Allah mentioned in the Quran as a dialogue with them. You know, why even He said, "Atatuna rijala shahwatan min dun nisa." Are you going to men in desires rather than going to women? So this we see already. Lut was warning them and rebuking them for the evil deeds that they were engaged in. And but obviously, as you can imagine, they didn't want to listen. They persisted in their ways, and they didn't want to reflect on how evil their actions was. Another interesting fact that Allah has given us in terms of in the dialogue between Lut and his people, and not his people, but the people of Sodom, was that he even mentioned that the actions that you guys are engaging in, مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهِ أَحَدٌ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. No one from mankind did what they were doing before them. So just like Qabil was the first one to engage in murder, the crime of murder, they were the first ones to engage in sodomy. That's why we even call sodomy, because it's from the people of Sodom. So this indicates that not only was their crime despicable, it wasn't even contemplated upon before that. Which is unfortunate that we live in a time where now this activity is being promoted and supported, and even now propagated and taught and pushed to even children. And this is a very important caveat I want to draw people's attention to. It's what the people of Sodom were doing. They weren't only involved in homosexuality, but they were aggressively involved in it. They forced themselves on other people. And if you think about it, since that time, we haven't really seen a time, and Allah's best, maybe I could be wrong, a time where a nation has returned to such aggressive homosexuality until recently, where now it's been aggressively pushed to the youth and pushed to the people, whereby now people lose their jobs if they were to say, I don't agree. If they were to say what Lut was to say, you might even lose your job and be forced to resign, which is a sign of deep times. But moving on. So as Lut tried to advise them and they refused, the angel said, don't worry, we've been sent here to destroy those who don't listen. So during Sahar, during the last part of the night, leave this place and we will deal with these people. And as Allah mentioned in the Quran, وَنَجَّيْنَاهُمْ بِسَحَرٍ, and we save them during the Sahar time. And you might recognize that word Sahar from the word Sahur, when we have Sahur in Ramadan. So Lut and his family fled, and those who were with him fled the city of Sodom during the last part of the night. And there are differences of opinion as to what happened with his wife. One narration or one event might have been that she remained with them because she supported them in their ways. And some say, no, she fled along with them. But what happened was that they were told not to turn back, not to look back at the town. And none of them did, but she did turn back, and therefore she was also destroyed. However, as Lut left the people and got far enough, it was mentioned that one of the angels lifted the entire city or village or whatever you want to call it, the area, up to the heavens. And it was mentioned in one narration up until the angels were able to hear the sounds of the crows and the barks of dogs. And then at that point, the town was turned upside down and thrown back down to earth. And then after all of that, still they were pelted with rocks, or maybe one might call them today like meteorites, on top of them as well. And what's interesting, subhanAllah, is that particular area, which is near the area what's called now the Dead Sea, it's called the Dead Sea for a purpose, because nothing lives there, or it's very difficult for life to even exist in the area. And it has been known since that time as not only a destroyed place, but a place that's you can almost describe it as being khabith, something that's been disgusting and not worthy of life as a whole, just to indicate how despicable and evil their deeds were. And that was the end of Sodom. And at that moment, Lut returned back to living with the area of Ibrahim. And not much is known about Lut after the fact, about his life after that. But inshallah, that was the story of Lut. One small thing to repel, as I mentioned, that we can bring sources from the children of Israel. But sometimes if it goes against what is in the Quran and Sunnah, we have to make it clear that this is false. And one of the things mentioned about Lut that was false mentioned in the Bible was that Lut, after that event, ended up marrying or having children with his own daughters. This is one of the lies mentioned about the prophets, and there are many things that have mentioned falsely against the prophets, and this is one of them that is important for the Muslims to understand, that we don't accept this belief at all. This is not the case, and there's never been the case whereby the prophets would do such a thing. We hope you benefited from this discussion. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.